ever worry that our entire economy is being driven off a cliff by a handful of dudes in an irrational techno-feudalist cult? No? Just me? Okay. So, the AI bubble. You've probably heard a lot of comparisons between the AI bubble and the dot-com bubble of the early 2000s. That's all good and valid in many ways, but that's not what's really keeping me up late at night. It's the fact that increasingly the AI bubble is way bigger, more complex, and more fragile than most people are aware of. I also see the ghost of the 2008 financial crisis rearing its ugly head, and in more ways than one. Lastly, I worry that should the economy start scream-crying to mommy, the US government will happily hand taxpayer dollars to the tech bro oligarchs and bankers who got us into this mess in the first place. The AI bubble is a story about stories, or maybe brainwashing is a better way of putting it. As a society, we are supposed to believe that the soulless, bloodless quant bros that inhabit Silicon Valley and Wall Street are smart. And not just smart, infallibly genius, rocket science experts, Ivy League grade physicists. I want you to really heed this point. This narrative, this story, is a lie. This quant bro lie is as much for each other in the world of elite money as it is for us everyday people. Silicon Valley tech bros lie to each other and to those in business and finance to get investments, loans, and enterprise contracts. Then they lie to us everyday people, condescending to us that we can't possibly understand math or science or money, so that we buy their products. More importantly, they lie to us so we don't fight against whatever bogus and harmful product they push. That's not to say that Silicon Valley can't or doesn't produce actual products that have real financial value. The smartphone, the PC, and yes, the internet are all things that do something real and different than what existed before. Never mind whether these innovations are a net good for people or the planet. What sets AI apart from these other innovations is that somewhere along the way, Silicon Valley got so drunk off its own success, it started believing its own lies. It started to think that every next half-baked idea was going to be a smashing success, simply because it had been so successful before. And unlike other failed or short-lived technology hype cycles, such as the metaverse and VR or the pandemic-era remote everything boom, AI at least had a glimmer of something different. In November 2022, the Silicon Valley equivalent of God coming down to Earth to preach the gospel happened. OpenAI launched ChatGPT, the world's first widely available LLM-powered chatbot, and arguably the villain of this story. The releases of models GPT 3.5 then, and especially 4.0 the following spring, were at least superficially impressive. Since then, the tech industry has rewired the entire US economy around the promise of generative AI. OpenAI caused perhaps the biggest and most dangerous wave of corporate FOMO the world has ever seen. Every major tech company, save for kind of Apple, was so worried that OpenAI had stumbled onto something big that they would also need to do or risk falling behind. Soon all of Silicon Valley locked onto the narrative that, especially with the development of artificial general intelligence, or AGI, generative intelligence would change the world. The issue is that the promise of generative AI is a lie. To call it intelligence is factually wrong, as it hallucinates by design and cannot actually learn or think. It is not nearly as helpful, safe, or revolutionary as the tech oligarchs want you to think it is. That didn't stop the lie from restructuring the entire economy and its image, though. At this point, I need to talk about various numbers here. I just want to warn that while I do have some professional experience in business and economics, I am by no means an actual economist or fiduciary. To the extent that I get something wrong here, and I probably will, I welcome good faith corrections in the comments. And I'm certainly not dispensing any kind of financial advice here. I'm just explaining how I see this monstrous bubble as a tech and media researcher. The AI economy is so complex and vague in no small part because private companies like OpenAI aren't required to publicly publish financial information. Accordingly, it's really difficult to give an exact size or shape to the AI economy. Disturbingly, one article I read described trying to understand the finances of AI companies as akin to staring into a black hole. From what I can divine, the effects of AI on the economy are deep. Just 7 tech companies are worth more than 40% of the total value of 500 global leading companies combined. Nvidia alone is worth 8% of the entire stock market. That's just one company. In 2025, AI investments, that is mainly investments in data centers and other AI infrastructure, contributed more to GDP growth than all of consumer spending combined. For reference, consumer spending, which is all the money that people spend on groceries and cars and Netflix subscriptions and shampoo, usually equates to roughly 2/3 of GDP. In 2025, investments in data centers accounted for 4% of GDP. Yet 92% of GDP growth, meaning how much the economy grew last year relative to the year before it, came from that much smaller 4% category. In short, the economy is largely AI at this point. If that sounds bad to you, it's because it is. No matter how you slice it, this is not a balanced, low-risk economy. Beyond the growth of the AI economy is the risk of a financial bubble. In other words, I can see that US GDP growth is reliant on data center spending, but why is that bad? So what if a certain kind of spending is growing the US economy, at least on paper? So what if AI has rewired the entire economy? The real issue here is that despite all the spending on data centers and stuff, AI doesn't make any profit. This is what has converted AI from just a growing tech sector to a bubble at risk of bursting. I need you to understand something. No AI model to date has ever been profitable. ChatGPT, Claude, Gemini, it doesn't matter. None of them are profitable, yet a ton of money is constantly being poured into training and running them. Reiterating the fact that it's impossible to have the true picture here, top tech companies spent about $400 billion on AI in 2025. They are projected to spend another $500 billion or so in 2026. For comparison, $500 billion is enough to pay for the entire Manhattan Project adjusted for inflation twice. So between 2025 and 2026, there will likely be close to enough AI spending for 4 Manhattan projects. If everything goes well, this spending will not stop anytime soon. Let's take a closer look at AI's most promising venture, the pony we've all proverbially bet the house on. Currently, OpenAI, whose ChatGPT bot has by far and away the largest user base, makes at most $20 billion a year. I want to point out a couple of things here. This $20 billion figure is annualized revenue, not actual annual revenue. This means that OpenAI may have taken their highest earning month, quarter, or whatever time period, and multiplied that number to get a year's projection of their revenue. In other words, we don't know if this number is accurate or way overinflated. Second, this $20 billion figure is revenue, not profit. So OpenAI may make up to $20 billion a year, but it spends far, far more because AI is incredibly expensive. OpenAI is operating at a massive loss. Even ChatGPT's most expensive subscription option at $200 a month still loses the company money. Sora, OpenAI's slop social media platform, similarly bleeds the company of money with every slop talk that is generated. One estimate put Sora's cost to the company at $15 million a day, or $5.5 billion a year. In late 2025, on top of announcements that it was maybe making up to $20 billion a year while still hemorrhaging money, OpenAI very proudly declared that it intended to spend $1.4 trillion over the next 8 years. So OpenAI plans to spend on average $175 billion a year over the next 7 to 8 years while they make $20 billion right now, maybe if you believe that number. The gap between revenue and spend here is massive. The only reason why OpenAI is still alive is that investors keep shoveling money into it. This investment is money that they're hypothetically supposed to earn back and then some. And like OpenAI, big tech companies like Microsoft, Google, and Meta are in similar positions with AI specifically. The only difference is that because they are profitable outside of AI, they are less reliant on external investment and debt to stay alive. That doesn't change the fact that none of these larger companies make a profit on AI. Worse yet, they all plan to substantially increase their spending in 2026. These revelations were bad enough to actually shake the stock market late last year when they all announced these big spending plans. I guess even investors, seduced by the promise of AI slop, don't love the idea of perpetually shoveling money into a furnace. So no AI model to date has ever been profitable, and they only continue to bleed money. What the real threat of the AI bubble is that it's not clear that these models will ever be profitable. Remember that all this investment and spending is based on the notion, the lie, that AI and especially AGI will lead to some kind of revolution in productivity. This is then supposed to create the massive amount of demand for AI vitally needed to justify the hundreds of billions of dollars spent on it. In reality, a handful of studies from 2025 point to AI being kind of a bust in terms of both capability and demand. One study by AI evaluation firm Meter showed that software developers were actually substantially slower when using AI chatbots to code. This is especially embarrassing for the AI industry because this is the one area that AI is supposed to help the most. A different study by consulting firm Bain & Company found that AI coding did not produce meaningful savings for developers. As a side note, what's wild about the computer age in general is that productivity hasn't meaningfully budged since the early 2000s, despite the widespread adoption of computers, smartphones, and the internet. A Nobel Prize-winning economist called this the productivity paradox, and it appears to be true of AI as well. Whatever stories you hear about AI causing mass layoffs appear to be mostly spin by companies to make their financial situations look better. Gen AI cannot systematically replace labor, and it has not led to some crazy spike in worker productivity. A third study by MIT showed that 95% of companies said that AI did not help their profitability at all. A fourth study by consulting firm McKinsey showed similar results, with 80% of surveyed companies reporting no bottom-line impact. Lastly, adoption of AI is not where it needs to be in order to turn a profit. One survey showed that although 19% of respondents use AI chatbots generally, only 3% of all respondents were willing to pay for it. In other words, there might be some, and emphasis on some, demand for free AI, but there is very little demand for the type of AI you have to pay for. By the way, these studies were not conducted by unhinged anti-AI hippies. In case this evidence doesn't convince you about the empty promises of AI, take a look at what else AI companies have been doing to try to shore up demand for their products. All of their marketing wants you to use AI for inane purposes, like making slop or just replacing Google search. They can't find a good, novel, or actually productive purpose for it for the average person. OpenAI is moving to allow a in ChatGPT, effectively turning the chatbot into an adult content app. Keep in mind, this is the technology that's supposed to cure cancer and solve global warming. This move to me screams desperation. No sane company would willingly turn their product into an Aroka dispensing machine unless they were totally desperate for money. OpenAI is also seemingly pretty okay with ChatGPT being sycophantic, as that keeps users coming back. One OpenAI exec explicitly said that safer versions of ChatGPT weren't connecting with users. Oh, but never mind the lawsuits alleging wrongful deaths at the hands of ChatGPT's sycophancy. In sum, Gen AI is a disappointing technology, and its development exhibits diminishing returns that will not generate the kind of demand needed to justify this level of spending. At its core, Gen AI is really just a souped-up type of machine learning that looks pretty but is kind of dumb. LLMs are probabilistic pattern prediction software that humans find impressive because they mimic human speech, and we are hardwired to find that as some form of intelligence. It's an illusion, not innovation. To be clear, I am not saying that AI can't ever be profitable. What I am saying is that despite the factual studied flaws of this technology, the AI bubble is ever fragile, and it keeps growing with no end in sight. There is no magic indication that this technology, with certainty, will have the kind of insane demand that justifies its cost. Not even the most optimistic pro-AI projections, like that of HSBC, a major global bank, can see a path forward for OpenAI to be profitable by 2033. If AI rewired the US economy and big tech lies inflated the bubble to an enormous size, this is the part of the story where the AI bubble bursts and contaminates everything. There are a million ways the AI bubble could burst, to the point of where predicting when and how is a bit of a fool's errand. The best way to think about a bubble bursting is the point at which just enough investors get scared that it causes a chain reaction. Investor A sells his AI stock, scaring investor B into doing the same thing, and so on, until AI becomes so toxic as an asset that we have to build a lead sarcophagus to put on it and pretend it doesn't exist. Within the world of AI, one of a number of AI companies could run out of cash, go belly up, and spook investors. The global addiction to Nvidia's line always going up could face a reckoning if it were to report slowing growth, also spooking investors. Energy shortages could prevent allegedly needed data centers from coming online, spooking investors. OpenAI might have to shutter Sora or some other aspect of ChatGPT that is just too costly, and guess what? Spook investors. There are myriad pointy bubble bursting needles outside of the AI industry too. What if the Fed doesn't cut rates as expected? What if geopolitical turmoil in Venezuela, Iran, Ukraine, or Greenland shakes the markets too much? What if crypto volatility gets worse, bleeding into other asset trade? What if large business loans taken on in private credit continue to default? If any of these occur, that initial chain reaction between investors might get triggered. Equity markets, where investors go to invest in companies to own parts of them, are just one example of where AI could be exposed to horrific chain reactions, though. There are two growing risk areas specific to AI that further expose it to cataclysmic chain reactions. The first one is the AI circularity that has become the world's scariest meme. This is what gives the AI bubble a unique fragility. Remember this chart I showed earlier? The circularity of the AI economy started as a major talking point in late 2025, and guess what? It hasn't gone away. Circularity is the concept in which companies give each other money, thereby artificially inflating their on-paper demand. A common example of this is if I were to give you $20 to dig a hole in the ground, and then you gave me the same $20 to fill it again. We're just passing back the same $20 forever. We're not actually doing anything, building an economy, or making more money. The issue with circularity isn't just that these companies might be inflating their value or demand. In AI, it's specifically that they are also making themselves deeply interdependent on one another. One especially scary part of this chain, in my view, is the relationships between OpenAI, Oracle, and NVIDIA. These three companies are so interdependent on one another, it seems to me that if any one of them were to falter, they might all falter. If that happens, the rest of this chart might get infected too. Remember what I said about the AI bubble story being one about brainwashing. Because of the centrality that ChatGPT has played in the narrative around AI, I worry what will happen, especially if OpenAI goes under. I know I'm not the only one to have voiced this concern. So let's say the bubble bursts. And the dot-com bubble bursting meant that certain stocks and tech-heavy indexes lost a lot of value. Some companies failed. A lot of people in the telecommunications industry lost their jobs, but that was kind of the end of the story. In simple terms, there was no bailout for the dot-com bubble because there was no systemic risk to the rest of the economy. Banks and other lending institutions didn't face existential threats as a result of the decisions they made in the dot-com bubble. This is where the third, final, and most dangerous type of chain reaction comes into play: debt. This is also why I believe the AI bubble to be more like the subprime mortgage bubble that burst in 2008 than popular thinking goes. This is partially why I think the AI industry and the institutions that went along with its lies might just get access to sweet, sweet taxpayer money in the form of a bailout. If this is the chart for the interdependence chain reaction, this is the chart for the oh shit, we're cooked chain reaction. Put simply, my concern here is that the AI industry is increasingly relying on debt, not just investment, to keep afloat. Debt is something you have to pay back, period. Investment is a wish, really, that you'll make money in the future, so you can't default on it. The costs of running and training AI models are so high, large and medium-sized tech companies have been taking on debt of various types to help pay for it all. If the AI bubble pops and AI companies start defaulting on their debt, then financial woes will spread to any financial institution that gave them money in the first place. Scarily, that sounds like all of the greatest hits of the 2008 US subprime mortgage crisis. That crisis grew into a global credit and financial crisis whose lingering effects are still felt to this day. In the mid-2000s, banks and other lending institutions started issuing risky mortgages to people who couldn't afford them. Eventually, those people defaulted, and a chain reaction caused a bunch of banks and companies to collapse. The US government had to intervene with a $700 billion program called the Troubled Asset Relief Program to stave off financial system collapse. When people refer to the 2008 bailout, TARP is generally speaking what they mean. I want to emphasize that there are many, many differences between subprime mortgages and AI companies. Subprime mortgages were inherently more prone to default because the borrowers, by definition, were less likely to be able to afford the mortgage. AI companies are only prone to default to the extent that 1, they have debt, and 2, they run out of money. The amount, type, and placement of debt also matter. Reasons why you shouldn't be overly worried about an AI-fueled financial crisis include that the debt loads of various AI companies differ in size. Some companies like Google and OpenAI have, for now, relatively less debt. Others, like Oracle and CoreWeave, are more highly leveraged, meaning that they have more debt relative to their own money. Another reason is that not all of this debt is super risky, in the sense that a lot of it has been issued as bonds directly from the companies. This type of debt usually doesn't feed into the greater financial system. Lastly, the AI industry and investors have shown signs of wariness about AI debt, putting pressure on AI companies not to take on debt. That's where the good vibes end, though. I'm worried about a 2008-like financial crisis, and I'm not alone in this, by the way, largely because of the opacity of this entire industry's finances. The truth is, there is no godlike omniscient view on this thing. No government, bank, or AI company has a complete view of what's going on. This is especially true of AI debt, as a lot of AI companies are private and therefore not required to publicly publish their data. More importantly, much of the debt issued here has been through private credit. This is hypothetically a type of lending that is non-bank lending, not traded on public markets. For reference, private credit is in this part of the debt chain reaction chart. Most disturbingly, while private credit traditionally hasn't been funded by banks, there is a lot of evidence suggesting that banks are in fact deeply embedded in private credit. In 2013, bank lending to private equity and private credit was 1% of banks' total loan commitments. As of 2025, that number was 14%. Moody's even has a whole terrible visual display of banks lending in private credit. The risk of substantial private credit in banking is bad enough that even researchers with the Fed have begun discussing it. The Fed researchers also specifically warn about losses to the financial system if multiple private credit defaults happen at once. You know, like a bubble bursting. The money question here is, are banks' loans in the same private credit funds as those propping up AI? In other words, how substantial and direct of a line is there between these two boxes on this chart? Because if this box gets hit, that's when we're really in trouble. I want to be transparent here. I couldn't find clear answers to these questions either way. This means that we shouldn't rush to conclude that AI is like 2008. My bigger point here is that we just don't know, in no small part because private credit is just that much harder to investigate. The opacity is the point. I worry that, as in 2008, we won't know how big or deep the rot goes until it's too late. And now, the cherry on top of this whole fiasco. The AI bailout is, for obvious reasons, the most contentious thing I discuss in this video, because talking about the US government on YouTube is always so harmonious and peaceful. Chatter about an AI bailout hit its peak back in early November 2025 when OpenAI Chief Financial Officer Sarah Frier let it slip that OpenAI was looking for some kind of government backstop. She later tried to walk her statements back, but many people, myself included, saw this as OpenAI testing the waters to see how people would respond to the concept of government backing of an AI company. Fortunately, the backlash to Frier's comments was incredibly fierce from all sides of the political spectrum. If the AI bubble is contained to a burst more like that of the dot-com bubble, where the financial system isn't exposed to too much bad debt, then we probably don't have too much to worry about. Probably. I'll get to that later. If the AI bubble pops and turns into a financial crisis, however, that's where a bailout might be, and I really hate to say this, necessary. Remember the TARP program from 2008 that I spoke about? When the bailout was initially being discussed in late 2008, it was really unpopular. I even found this old NPR clip of a Wall Street trader who, at the time, was opposed to the bailout despite his own professional stake in the matter.
People made stupid loans, and now they want the government to bail them out. And I'm sorry, at this point, it's my tax dollars, it's your tax dollars. I just think we have to say no.
The same guy a week later said that he had changed his mind because the situation had gotten so bad, not for him, but for the whole world. We're talking collapse of the financial system and its basic functions bad. Taken for granted in a modern AI remix of the situation is that banks and other involved financial institutions would get taxpayer money so that they wouldn't just cross the rainbow bridge. This would be incredibly infuriating by itself. It would mean that for the second time in my life, a bunch of Wall Street banks made stupid decisions with their money, and now we taxpayers have to foot the bill. Remember, these are supposed to be the genius quant bros who are like so smart and who thought that funding the AI gamble was a good idea. While not the central characters in this story, banks and related financial institutions have played their fair share in hyping the AI Kool-Aid. What's unclear is to what extent AI companies themselves would get a bailout. Probably Meta, Google, Microsoft, and Amazon would be okay. Their stock prices would take a beating, sure, but they were viable businesses before. AI is only one part of what they do. The companies I have questions about are central players like OpenAI, Oracle, and even Nvidia. I'm going to assume, as have others, that Microsoft would probably do whatever it wanted with OpenAI's IP and customers, given the quasi-ownership it has over the smaller company. But what about the highly leveraged Oracle, one of the biggest data center companies out there? Or Nvidia, whose unique placement in this mess as the only major AI chip manufacturer allegedly makes it a US national security interest. The US government has already commandeered part of Nvidia's profits just by squeezing them enough. It also recently bought out part of Intel because the company faced, guess what, financial distress. So clearly the government has an appetite for moving here. All this might not matter anyway. Ultimately, whether AI can or really should be bailed out doesn't matter because the US government isn't a rational actor. Decades of foreign wars, neoliberal trade policies, and tariffs have showed that the United States government is more than willing to go against both popular opinion and rational thought. There's even a tech bro billionaire in the White House by the name of David Sacks who's constantly whispering into the president's ear about AI. I doubt, despite Sacks' public statements on the matter, that he'll just let the AI industry go into that good night. Remember, billionaires hate paying taxes, but they sure do love taxpayer money. On top of that, big tech has spent the better part of the last year cuddling up to the government, in no small part to keep the AI party going. There's also been a lot of chatter about the AI industry receiving some kind of financial or legislative assistance for a while now. Discounting taxpayer companies going to AI companies in some way, whether through a TARP-like program or through some other means, seems a bit naive as a result. After all, lobbying and corruption have defined American business for decades. Why would the AI bubble be any different? There are so many reasons why I might be wrong here, and I fully acknowledge that. Heck, I wish I am wrong. Wrong about the AI bubble, wrong about what it might do to the financial system, and wrong about the bailout. If I'm right about this, it means that instead of taxing the rich to fund healthcare, education, and housing, we effectively let a bunch of Silicon Valley fools shovel Manhattan Project-sized piles of money into a furnace. Instead of strengthening Social Security to be a better pension system, we let a bunch of investors gamble with Americans' retirement funds out of belief in Silicon Valley's lies about AI. And if I'm right about the more controversial stuff, like a bailout, it means that we get to sign all of this off by handing a taxpayer-funded check to Jensen Huang or whomever and saying, try not to do that again. There are things you can do to help. Staying vigilant here is a big one. Don't let Silicon Valley get away with its lies. If you're in the US, hold your legislators accountable for what happens here. If you know someone who is pro-AI and who is skeptical that the bubble exists, you could always, I don't know, send them this video. Lastly, stay safe and sane out there. Try to find a hobby that screens and AI can't touch. Thanks so much for watching, and don't forget to like and subscribe.